Hello and welcome to the Open Era podcast. My name is Devang and I'm joined as always by Mr. Simon Bushell for another edition of Open Era Gold. Bush, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. In addition to my previous joke about Spandau Ballet, I also thought about Gold, the chocolate box of biscuits. Do you know that one? Are you aware of that?
I'm not. Is it like shortbread? What's the type of biscuit?
It is. It's like an assortment of biscuits that you would get around Christmas time in the UK, where you'd be given a box of assorted biscuits, but the very best, hence the gold labeling.
That's dangerous around me this time of year and at all times. But I'm a biscuit fiend. I feel like, what's the slightly older version of the Cookie Monster? Biscuit fiend? That's me. So I think I'd like those.
Are you a biscuit man then? I never knew this about you.
I am. I mean, I think I've always liked cookies, I'll be honest here, but biscuits, I've been coming around to them lately. It's the more refined version, right?
Is there actually a difference? This is one thing that I've always wondered. I never knew what is considered a cookie these days.
Not to get too deep into biscuit talk, but like biscuits are also kind of bad. It's not like they're better for you. You know, like the shortbread stuff, like that packs a punch.
Is this kind of like the inane bollocks that people hate about podcasts just to start an opening segment?
Yeah, probably. A full 3 minutes about biscuits. But this time of year, it's fair. I was going to say Ferrero Rochers, like those chocolates wrapped in the gold foil. Also reminded by Open Era Gold.
So keep your suggestions coming in. What does Open Era Gold remind you of?
So we've done 2 bushel picks already. It's time for the Desai reign to begin, Simon. Do you have any idea where I'm going with my first pick?
A little bit of an idea, yeah. If I was to shut my eyes, I think I probably could have guessed the direction that you were going in.
Indeed. I probably won't surprise you when I say that the match I chose featured Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic, but I might surprise you that it's not something they did at a slam, namely Wimbledon. But for my first pick, let's return to Cincinnati. The final on Sunday, August 20th, Simon, a 3-set epic, which I think you can say sometimes about Cincinnati. And this tournament has some blemishes. It's not perfect, but when I heard they wanted to move it, Simon, it made me love it more. And I think this match for me encapsulated a lot of what 2023 was all about, because after Wimbledon, it felt like Carlos Alcaraz has taken over the tour. And though Novak Djokovic was not done by any means, something had happened at Wimbledon. And yet, like he's done so many times, Novak Djokovic said, not yet.
He certainly did. Is your love affair with Cincinnati in any relation to the Gerber baby?
I mean, how could you not love that sinister child looking at you at all times, asking for donations? I think it's part of my life. It's also that it's in Mason, Ohio. Like, I think it's one of the more random things for tennis and what tennis is becoming and rapidly changing into, with this idea of jetting off to any place they can go that's going to pay them enough money. I do like that Mason, Ohio. It's like, yeah, we're going to keep doing this. Not to say there's not money involved when it's operated by a bank, but it's just Mason.
Talking about the match that you're... I'll leave that aside, perhaps, because I've never been to Mason, Ohio.
It's just Mason. Are you saying that's not a key slogan they should take? It's just Mason.
Take the Ostrava route and write that at the back of the court. It's just Mason, people. Come on.
In like a cursive? I think that's really good, to be honest.
I think it's great. The first line of the ATPTour.com write-up for this final, Novak Djokovic won one of the best matches in recent memory on Sunday. Now that is high praise. That is quite astonishing.
Not hyperbole either. And I you don't think so?
I am very curious to know your reasoning and rationale behind why you chose this match. I think it is okay in fits and starts. I don't quite understand the universal love of this match, because perhaps we'll come on to it during the course of this podcast, but this was two bodies very much aching. And the level of tennis at times was outstanding, and the level of tennis at other times looked very much like 2 dudes just pushing and injured to me.
Well, I think that's fair. I think the reason, and I mean, you could make the same argument about the Wimbledon final, couldn't you? In terms of How good was that? I think I chose Cincinnati because for me, it was the perfect distillation of Novak Djokovic, I'd say, in the sense that he had a hat on at times. He also looked severely injured at times. He also looked superhuman at times. He also looked annoyed at hell at times. It was everything that is Novak Djokovic. And to talk about someone who ended up basically walking away with another bag of titles, I think it's interesting to look at him at this particular juncture of the season, because from here on in, I think it was a reassertion of his claim to whatever mantle you want to call it, aka the best player currently playing. So I think it was an important moment, because no matter if Carlos Alcaraz wasn't 100%, I think the week before in Toronto at that tournament, that's all anyone talked about. And it's also because Novak wasn't there, but I think the conversation around the grounds is all about Alcaraz and how it was his tour now. And that vibe permeated throughout the tournament there. So I thought it was interesting that in Cincinnati, while he had an opportunity to do it again against Novak, he couldn't. And not to say that Boris Becker and his ilk are right, but there's still another step or two for Charlie. And I think that was important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a lot in this match that's interesting to unpack, not just the way that I think Alcaraz attempted to deal with some of the, I don't think gamesmanship tactics is too strong, but certainly some old man tennis.
Peak Novak. Novak doing some old man stuff out there. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think the flip side of that as well is it's pretty obvious that Alcaraz is not doing great by the middle of the third set. I think he says on court at the end that he's got some severe cramps in his right hand as well. And I think that's testament to some of the rallies that we see in the third set as well. But it's a pretty fascinating matchup just from not only a tactical perspective, but just from the psychology of two dudes who know each other fairly well at this point, Dev.
Big time. And I think the heat was another thing that I believe it was like 32 degrees Celsius, so like 90 Fahrenheit on the court. And that's probably not factoring in the sun beating down on you. So the humidity also being a problem. But the conditions factoring in big time. I think you also saw them not playing at their best at the same time for chunks, which has also been somewhat familiar in their matchup or their rivalry so far. I think the ATP finals in 2023, a great example of that, where maybe you could say Carlos didn't play badly, but I think Novak was just a level above. For me, this match was underlined by the fact that it was peaks and valleys for both, and even the end in which Alcaraz is finding himself survive, I thought that was fascinating. I think there was times in the second set where I thought Novak was cooked. In the first set, I mean, just the pure hitting early on in between the shadows, it made sense that they were completely dead by the end.
First off, I'm incredibly impressed that you knew the temperature in Fahrenheit. I still, to this day, have no concept what those numbers mean. Is 90 a lot? I think it is, right?
Yeah, but that's why, because I kept getting mad when I saw maps in the USA with huge numbers on it and the map in like dark red. And I'm like, what's going on down there? But I had to learn. But yeah, 90 is pretty hot. I think you're seeing 120 pretty regularly in some American states these days, which is terrifying.
I always find it interesting when I'm watching the NFL around Christmas time and someone's like, it's like 12 degrees. It's going to be one of the coldest days ever in Kansas City. And I'm thinking to myself, it sounds quite nice in December.
That's not bad at all. Sounds pretty great. Yeah. Open nice a book, man. Winter. Or also America, get with the times. I shouldn't yell at you. This is on America.
So the Cincinnati final.
The Cincinnati final, first set push, Novak jumps out to a lead, leading 4-2, looking fine, looking like he can handle anything Alcaraz has to dish at him. Like we said, this was a tough day to play tennis. And like throughout this tournament, I mentioned Toronto. Carlos lost to Tommy Paul there. He got revenge against Paul in the third round here, but he played a lot of tennis. But he played every match he played was a 3-setter. I wonder why he was dead by the end.
Yeah, I think he was on court for about 10 hours, wasn't he, by the end of this championship? Yeah. Was it 10 hours to get to the final, which is a lot of time when it's only the space of a single week. I thought this first set was a pretty good level overall. Like, I'm not shitting on this first set at all. Like, I think it's really kind of fascinating from a tactical perspective. And another point on this one, if you are a fan of long, grueling backhand to backhand rallies cross court, then this was box office viewing for you, Devang. That's what we got a lot of in this first set.
The thing arguably Simon hates the most, you could say.
Just repetitive micro movements on the backhand side. I love it. Love it so much.
Okay, so yeah, and I think when Alcaraz makes the comeback and Novak kind of goes away, and with the beginning of the second set, it feels like this could be relatively quick, or as quick as it could be for both these guys who like to take their time. But I think things get a bit weird towards the end of the second set. Bush matches on Alcaraz's racket, and then it no longer is. I don't think this was anything about like big moments getting to him, because I mean, once you do it at Wimbledon, what's bigger than that? But I'm curious what you think about Novak poking and prodding around Alcaraz's game and finding inroads, or are you more on the side of Alcaraz's level falling off in the second set? Because there is a point there around when he gets that break back in the second set where it kind of flips.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating question of whether or not, how much stock do you put in the micro adjustments, Novak Djokovic, the master of poking and prodding, and how much of this is a 20-year-old thinking that he's over the line against a guy that's suffering in the heat and just sort of begins to believe his own Kool-Aid that he's unbeatable on court and really does not do enough to get across the line and kill off the greatest defensive player of all time. I think it's probably more the latter than the former, honestly. I don't think Djokovic does anything particularly, fantastic in that second set to come back. I think Carlos Alcaraz will be kicking himself, and I'm sure he was at the conclusion of this match, but my goodness, this one should have been wrapped up and done, because, we kind of bury this a little bit, but he does really well to bring that break back in the first set and close it out in really, emphatic fashion. I thought he played a really good set of tennis despite not starting well. And he plays a continuation of that in the second set. And then he just kind of, I think he just phones it in a little, right? Which we're all guilty of in any sport.
Yeah. And I think the idea of expecting Novak to go away, it's naive, but it's also a bit insane. Like it's not going to happen no matter the situation, or 99.9% of the time. It just doesn't feel like that's something he will do. At least definitely not anymore. And he didn't. He just stuck around long enough to find a crack, an opening, and get the break back, and then get into a tiebreak in which, I mean, say what you can about Novak. Like there's a lot of things we can say. It's ridiculous, a lot of the things he does, but the record in tiebreaks is insane. And I also like that he gets down a match point as well in this tiebreak before reverting to what he can do pretty relentlessly well, and that's stick in rallies and grind his opponent down into dust, even someone with an all-court game like Alcaraz. That being said, Simon, I mentioned he grinded people down into dust. Like the forehand and backhand rhythms that Novak can generate. Like I know he's been widely praised, but are his like regular shots underrated somehow? Like, are we underrating that the forehand and backhand are as pristine as they are at points in this match?
I think it's largely your definition of what a clean ball striker is, because, I'm on record on this podcast of saying that I think Jannik Sinner is one of the best ball strikers ever in the history of tennis, just of how clean he strikes a tennis ball. But Novak Djokovic is himself phenomenal in terms of his ground strokes and his ability to consistently find depth over and over and over again, metronomic in terms of his ability to find spots over and over. And I think it's on full display in this tiebreaker and really his entire career in tiebreakers as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any surprise to say that I think he's the greatest tiebreak player of all time. That's not really a particularly surprising statement, but I think it's, if you are wanting a case study of why he is so good in tiebreaks, this is a really good example of why he is.
Not to give Nick Kyrgios any added airtime, but let's do it now, Simon. I don't know if you saw his comments about how Pete Sampras would get murked, quote unquote, if he played in today's game. He was saying Leighton Hewitt murdered him, and imagine if Leighton could do that, what Novak would do. But if you could set it up somehow, and they did that weird McEnroe AI thing on ESPN, so it seems doable. Can we not set up Sampras versus Djokovic in a tiebreak with the same technologies, them using the same rackets? Get on it, AI companies.
Actually do something useful with any of this technology.
Yeah, instead of destroying the world, give us this weird hypothetical that two tennis sickos want. But I'd love to see it. Because I mean, the Novak idolizing Pete thing and Sampras having one of the most ridiculous serves against a cavalcade of great returners. It'd be at box office viewing. That's the tiebreak. Novak wins it. He wins all the tiebreaks. But we get to the third set, and this is probably why I picked this match, Simon, as my men's pick of match of the year, open era gold. The third set was nuts, and I think this is also why this match lives so large in my head, is because the end of this match was insane, Simon. Because at 5-3, Novak leading, I remember I'm texting you on WhatsApp, getting ready to do the show. We're lamenting, let's be honest here, we're lamenting that Novak has beaten Carlos somehow, and yet 4 championships later, and some incredible shot making, as Novak's serve finally dipped a bit, produced some hilarious stuff, some great stuff. Like that was capital T tennis.
I guess let's start with a question. Did you buy for one moment that Djokovic was injured? Are you still a believer at this point? Anytime he does anything on court?
I think I'm a mark. I believe that he needed whatever potions were sent over by his camp. It was hot though. Listen, it's hot and he's my age. So now or a bit older. Yeah, I get it, man. And he's playing kids now. It's so strange, but I'm like, you know what? Screw them kids, Novak.
I will say that I have gone past I'm through the looking glass at this point whenever he's injured, that I just don't believe him anymore. It's been boy who cried wolf just too many times at this point, and I've seen him win from these positions too many times that I just don't really buy it at this moment.
The other thing is I don't believe any of these people most of the time because of the bathroom breaks and the taking 80 minutes after losing a set. You know?
It's true. Okay, so I think the back end of this match is fantastic. It's great drama. It's gripping. There's no other word really to describe the sequence of events that happened for Alcaraz really to hang in this match the way that he does, including that just ridiculous shot that he's down match point where he has no business staying in it. I think my issue with the back end of this is that Carlos Alcaraz gets so conservative, like ridiculously, and I know the hand injury probably has something to do with it, but they are not.
He gets Keir Starmer with a chance at winning an election.
He does, yeah. A fantastic analogy, Dev. But
yes,
it's Carlos Alcaraz. If there's one thing that you would describe of him, he's not a passive player. He's not someone that just waits for moments. He forces issues,
and it looks strange when he's doing it. Right?
It looks very weird. It looks like he's not interested sometimes when he's just in these long, grueling like baseline rallies where no one's really, and that grueling's not even the right word, right? Grueling would imply that this is, epic, tight length being, kept by both men and they're really picking apart at each other when they're kind of just, they're not rolling the ball back into court, but they are not going at 100% here at all. It's two dudes who are being very cautious, who are moving the ball around the court. And for me, it didn't make the greatest of tennis, even though it produced, I think, some really fantastic moments as well.
I think that's fair. And once again, like the narrative beast reared its head. And I think that's why it meant a lot watching this as a fan and like looking at some of the other big matches this year, like the Sinner Alcaraz semifinal in Miami, or I'm trying to think of like what other, maybe even like one of the Medvedev Zverev beatdowns, like non-slam edition. I think this had the biggest impact on the tour. And I think that says something about it because of how oversized the slams are in importance for tennis, that this broke through in a way that it rarely does on the men's side in this current juncture of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a part of this where people were looking at to see whether the aura of Alcaraz following that victory at Wimbledon actually held up in Cincinnati. Another big final with the eyes on another opportunity to cement himself as the world number one and really take control of the tour. And I think the narrative in general that he was the best player in the world and that the torch had been passed. Unfortunately, tennis doesn't really work like that a lot of the times, and it certainly didn't. It certainly did not take place on this day as well.
It did not. Novak taking the third set in a tiebreaker. We had a miss Novak overhead.
The Djoko slam.
Late here as well, which was the Djoko smash that we all loved. And it set the stage really for a pretty big scene at the US Open. And what we were expecting to see there. Of course, Daniil Medvedev spoiled that rematch attempt, and Novak went on to win, beating Daniil to cap a pretty monster year for a monster player. 2023 for Novak Djokovic, 3 slams. The one he did not win is because of Carlos Alcaraz. Simon, any final thoughts on this rivalry as we zoom in and then zoom out on Alcaraz Djokovic?
I think actually Cincinnati will be a fascinating example to study at the conclusion of Novak Djokovic's career, because you see this situation where Alcaraz beats him in a Wimbledon final and then loses in this Cincinnati final. Whether or not, is that a pivot point? Does Djokovic lose to him again, ever? It's kind of fascinating how this works, because the man has made a history of working out people's patterns and behaviors and then exploiting the shit out of them on a tennis court.
Beating you, pummeling you with them. The aura is real. I know Jannik Sinner did some huge stuff at the end of the year, and I'm so excited to see him in 2024. And Alcaraz is Alcaraz, but Novak is Novak, man. The aura is real. This match gets my selection for one of the matches of the year on Open Era Gold. As always, we are on patreon.com/Open Era. Join us there. Get the show ad free. Get it on Sundays. Plus, join us on the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. We're also on Twitter/X.com/Open Era Pod there. For producer Dylan on the ones and twos, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next time.